Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Let's Write Adventure, our ongoing live stream where we are creating a completely custom campaign in real time. I'm your host, RJ Kerr, and today we are going to be rounding out what's left of our Sea Shanty Siren adventure. We've done a fair amount on this already, but if you haven't seen this in the previous streams or you're not sure where we are in the process at the moment, let me go ahead and give you a recap on what we've done so far so that you're not lost. So, as I said, we are creating a completely custom campaign with its own unique domain of dread. And to give ourselves a little bit of structure to work with there, we've decided to use a story circle framework. The idea being that this will give us sort of a loose structure from which to deviate so that we can make sure we've got all the pieces and parts of a coherent story as we go through building out the campaign as a whole. Now, we've done a lot of work on this already. We have already figured out how our characters enter into this domain of dread, and it's through a portal that opens up on the blood moon. We have talked about what kind of motivations would draw our characters into this domain of dread all on their own. We have uh, we have figured out where the characters are going to land in a shanty town called Darkport, which sits on the edge of an inland sea. And we have figured out that this inland sea is a big part of this domain of dread, that it was once the basin of a thriving metropolis. It's now fallen into ruin and become flooded. We've also figured out that the Dread Lord of this domain is an elemental entity that we're calling Ovander, who we're still figuring out exactly how this entity fits into the overall scheme of this campaign and this domain of dread. So that's something that's still developing. Now, we've also figured out the first adventure that the characters get drawn into, one where they are kidnapped and briefly enslaved and have to escape their captors, and in doing so, discover the existence of a long lost artifact, an artifact that gives the characters some sort of power over this domain of dread. And so they realize that this is their best chance for getting out of this domain alive. They need to go find this artifact. And so now we're working on a very what I'd call a proactive section of the campaign, where the characters are getting out of the world. They're making a lot of their own choices. They're no longer just reacting to the situation. They're making their own plans, and they're finding clues and following those clues to investigative scenes or nodes. And so we're using this node structure style, which allows us to have a little bit of shape as DMs, so that we're not having to come up with everything on the fly as we play, but also give our players a ton of agency because we don't want to be railroading them throughout the campaign. We want to make sure that they've got a lot of opportunities to make their own choices that change how the game gets played, that actually are significant in this world. And so we are in the process of building out all these different nodes, or as I like to call them, investigative scenes, because they each feature clues that the characters can find and lead them to another node, creating kind of this network of clues and investigative scenes, so the characters can kind of map their progress however they like through this structure. Um, we've done a couple of these already. We've done one that's sort of a classic sort of dungeon. We've used the 5 room dungeon methodology for that. We've done one that's a heist, and we've used the 5 scene dungeon format for that. Now we're working on one that what I would call is a complex social encounter, because it relies less on a sort of a dungeon structure and more on the interaction and dynamics between NPCs, and therefore between the what the characters role play with them. And that is our Sea Shanty Siren adventure. So let me go ahead and share my screen here, and we will kind of review what we've done real quick. For this one, we have a siren that's a predatory creature by nature. She lures beings to her toll and feasts on them. However, she's recently had her voice taken from her, and she needs to steal someone else's voice. She wants the characters to do it. The only catch is she's got a couple special requirements to this voice, and so she's selected some likely candidates. And that whoever's voice they take has to give that voice up willingly. And so we've built out a fair amount of information about the siren in terms of her motivations and her values and what have you, so that she's nice and developed. So when we have to have these sort of in depth, on the fly conversations as the siren, with the characters, we've got a lot to work with here without it being too overwhelming. Um, we've also figured out that the characters are going to have to interact with at least one of those three NPCs that they can go and take the voice from. And so we've built out a fair amount for them as well. We've done a little bit more here because they really want some, because the characters want something from these NPCs. And therefore, we've given them a little bit of backstory in terms of a dilemma. We've given them a secret that the characters could discover and might be able to use that as a lever against this NPC and so on. And so we've built out three of those: a bard, a priest, and a widow. And then we have come up with this basic mechanic for failure, where effectively, if the characters fail to get one of the NPCs to give up their voice, they start to lose reputation around the world and various other settlements. And so, what we were working on last time is sort of some complications for success, because we don't want this to devolve into just a series of charisma checks that don't really kind of go anywhere. It just becomes a glorified skill challenge at this point. So what we wanted to do is throw up some blocks so that when the characters do eventually succeed at one of these interactions, there is a response to that, and they have to overcome it. We talked about getting ambushed by thugs for the bard, getting swarmed by an angry mob for the priest, having the ghost of the widow's spouse possess one of the PCs and try to steal the contract, and so on and so forth. All fun things, add a little bit of complication to it, add a little twist, keeps it dynamic. So now we are rounding out kind of the last little bit. We want to talk about the return, what happens here in terms of what happens if the characters fail, what happens if they succeed, what happens if they try to, zig when we expect them to zag, that sort of deal. And then we also want to give ourselves just a little bit of flavor for the uh, for the sort of their arrival, sort of set the scene when they encounter this siren. So we're going to hopefully get through all of that today. So with that, the last thing I will say is, remember, this is an interactive stream. So as you have thoughts, ideas, opinions, questions, comments, concerns, or anything else you want to talk about, jump into the chat. Love hearing from you all. You guys come up with some amazing ideas, and you really add a lot of value to this. So keep it up. Looking forward to seeing what your thoughts are on this and what we've got, what we can build today. So let's see here. Let's go ahead and we'll work on the return first. I think that's probably the most significant bit here that we've got to do. So we'll give that a good look over. Before we jump into this, though, looks like we've already got some comments in the chat, mostly highs and hellos. And then Ben Elder says, had an idea that maybe Ovander is the inland sea, and seeks to grow in power to drown the domain completely so they can escape to other planes. Interesting. So he goes on to say, thinking the Dark Prince of Water Elementals, that kind of deal. That is an interesting idea. We had envisioned Ovander before as being sort of almost the Dark Prince of like a storm elemental kind of deal, right? So the mostly wind and having some rain and being a mixture of a few things. But none of that's necessarily set in stone. And just because Ovander has the power over the storms and what have you, doesn't mean that he couldn't be the sea himself. And that would be interesting to really kind of conceptually make the major villain so pervasive throughout this. It might give us a cool little mechanic, a cool little way to get Ovander introduced early and frequently have him kind of disturb the machinations of the players, or the characters, I should say. So that is an interesting idea. Let's go ahead and put a little note here. So let's add that idea. And yeah, it looks like we even had the idea that he was a shapeshifter, that he's kind of taking on different forms between elements. Yeah, let's bear that in mind. Let's say perhaps Ovander is the inland sea itself. And seeks to grow his elemental power to swallow the whole of his domain and expand beyond the walls of this fragile container. Kind of the idea that I kind of get from this that I really like about that idea too, beyond what we just kind of mentioned, is um, this idea of him, spilling over into other planes, as they kind of fit together, and the idea of this being sort of a, once this be kind of the, the cup that overfloweth, as he is the sea, and literally physically spread into other domains. It's kind of an interesting idea. Very cool one, Ben Elder. I like that. I like that a lot. Um, Really, one of the things that I was really kind of off screen here struggling with for him was how we were going to make the Dread Lord matter in this adventure. Um, you know, because if he's an opponent later on, and that's kind of how I envision this as kind of, a big boss kind of deal, right? But we still want him to be present throughout the adventure so that it's not just a like, oh, we've never heard of you before, and now we have to fight you sort of thing for the players. So making him the sea itself could be really interesting. That could be really interesting. I like that. Um, okay, so a couple other comments here. Mr. Max, boss dipped in the pick up new phone for security guards, and our printer is out of toner, so I literally cannot do anything at work but just answer the phones. Hey, well, you know what? We're here to entertain. Then Mr. Max says, does the big bad necessarily have to be bad? Maybe he's got sent there by a bigger bad and he is merely doing everything he can to leave the domain. And over time, he has come to hate his quote unquote prison. Um, it says I haven't completely caught up on this playlist, so I'm sorry if that was already answered. No, that wasn't answered previously. And there's no requirement when you're telling a story to truly make your villains fundamentally evil. In fact, there's plenty of good stories where the villain can be redeemed, where there can be a friendly sort of outcome, that there's a way to kind of get through this without slaying each other, that sort of idea. Now, I will warn you that if you humanize your villains, many of, I won't say every time, but I will say plenty often, your characters will fall in love with them, or your players will fall in love with them, and they'll decide they have to save that villain at any cost. That they've got to come up with some really out of the box thinking to save that villain from themselves, which is not necessarily a bad thing. Just being aware that that's one potential path that the story could go down. Um, I personally try to, uh, you know, um, I personally try to make my villains um, fairly evil. Personally, just because I like exploring that dynamic between good and evil. I like the moral quandaries that good adventurers are faced with when they're confronted by an amoral sort of entity, or a deeply evil sort of entity. And that's just a personal preference in my adventures. That's not a hard and fast rule by any stretch of the imagination. It's just something that I like to play with in my own art here, as it were. So good question. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with making the big bad not completely bad, but a victim in their own right. Let's see here. Ben Elder says, I am the crushing waves. I am the thundering rain. I am the rivers that will wash away mountains. And before the end, you will welcome me into your lungs. Maybe some mid fight dialogue. Yeah, you can definitely do some monologuing in there. And uh, yeah, you absolutely could do some monologuing. And sometimes it's fun to do that, especially if you're trying to do a very cinematic sort of thing here with yeah, with your action sequences. Uh, Again, can be a lot of fun if you're good at monologuing. Awesome, more power to you. I will also say it can be tough in the middle of a fight to come up with those things. So, kind of sketching them out ahead of time, so you have them kind of on a note card or on a list somewhere, can be supremely helpful if you want mid-fight monologues. Okay, so with that, let's get into what we're working on here, and that is the return. The characters have they have finished this mission, whether they've succeeded or they have failed or they've done some mixture of both. Um, they have completed what they can. Now we have to describe what happens. Um, so we can have a failure condition. We can have I mean so we have a failure condition. They don't come back with a voice. So what does how does the siren respond to that? Does she attack them? Does she curse them? Does she just simply send them away? What is her response to that? When they succeed, does she give them the reward she promised? Does she try to withhold it from them? Does she, you know, do they have to, take it one step further and coerce it out of her, or is she just kind of go along with her word here? Was that binding to her in some capacity? And then what happens if the characters try to trick the siren? They deviated from one of these NPCs. They found a mockingbird and got it to give its voice over for this. Um, and now they're trying to sell it to the siren and deceive them. Um, so yeah, so let's kind of figure that out. I think let's start with a quick annotation here. We're going to say the return um, when the characters um, return to the siren at the end of the quest. One of the following situations is likely to occur. Uh, yeah. Cool. Uh, Jonathan Ross says a pirate's parrot voice. Yeah, exactly. Right. We got plenty of pirates in this. Maybe they got a parrot to squawk into this and have the pirates sign the contract on behalf of the parrot. Who knows? Who knows? Your players will come up with interesting stuff. So planning a little bit for what happens when they try to trick the siren is a worthwhile sort of endeavor. Um, and it may force us here to figure out what the siren stat block is at this point, because we have not done that as of yet. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Um, let's talk about failure here. So let's see here. If the characters, I'm just going to annotate them as the PCs, fail to acquire the voice, let's say one of the requested voices, and return empty-handed, comma, and then we'll figure out what goes on here. So the question I would have for you all is, do we want this end to be straightforward in terms of, they fail, she turns them away. They succeed, she gives them what they want. And or do we want to add a little more complication to that? I personally am a fan of adding a few more consequences to this sort of thing. Um, but uh, uh, but we can go either way. Looks like Ben Elder says maybe for a failure, she curses the party and says she will settle for a voice from one of them. Result is their voice is gravelly and scarred, cannot cast vulnerable components, disadvantage on charisma rolls. Hmm. That's a distinct possibility. Um, I like that overall. Um, the thing that we need to consider on that is twofold when we make a spell, when we make a curse like that, is that there's nothing from keeping us from doing this. And one of the cool, things about the magic system here is you have kind of the no magic system, which is what the players interact with, or the when they pick spells for their characters and what have you, and their characters cast them. And then you have sort of what I consider like the fairy tale magic of the side, which is pretty much the godlike magic that that the DM can wield. And so there's easy for us to say, yep, this curse takes effect, and this is what happens. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. The thing that we want to be aware of when we do something like that, though, is one, what if the voice taken does not belong to a spellcaster? Maybe the fighter gives up their voice. How does not being able to cast, not being able to use verbal components in spell casting affect them? It doesn't. So it can be kind of a like, well, do they really care sort of situation, which again is not necessarily a bad thing, but it can nerf some of the effect that we were hoping to have with that. The other bit is if the um, if it is a spellcaster and they do lose their voice, and the characters therefore have one character who's no longer able to use a major component of their class, uh, the the players themselves are going to feel pressured to go solve this right away, right? Because they're not going to try to carry on with their other quests for the most part with one of their characters down and out. Um, and from a player's perspective on that, uh, it can cause a couple things. One, it can create some incredible role playing, some very cool stuff in the adventure. If you've got a player who is happy to kind of roll with that and enjoys kind of the excitement of the challenge that comes along with that, and the complexity of the story that goes along with it. The other thing to be advised, though, or to be aware of, is that if you have a character who just kind of feels like now their character can't do, you have a player who just feels like now their character can't do anything. Um, that creates, a kind of a deadhead at the table, right? And so you have somebody who feels like they're just twiddling their thumbs until their voice can be restored and their character can start casting spells again. Um, and so that's a situation where I'd say you want to be careful with this. If you want to make sure you know your players if you're gonna do something like that. That being said, we don't know our players and we want a cool story, so yeah, I'm down with that curse. Let's do it. Um, the um, they I would even say we take it a step further. Instead of it being a damaged voice, their voice is gone. They just can't talk. Especially since common sign language now exists in D&D 5e 2024. Um, so I don't know that I would put the disadvantage on charisma checks per se, only that they can't they can't do anything that requires them to speak. Um, because again, that's very much in the vein um, of what this siren can do. The other option here is that, or the other thing that now that I think about it, is that the siren was requiring one of these voices to be given up willingly. So the question that your players are likely play excuse me your players are likely to ask is, okay, well, if I don't give up my voice willingly, how can she take it? And if she could just do that before, why didn't she do it herself? um, and so there does create some sort of some discontinuity uh, in some of the magic that we have kind of woven into this particular engagement here. So that's something to be aware of there. Um, so that might be, we could answer that though by creating a binding contract at the beginning of this, especially since this siren works with contracts, uh, in the sense that because she's needs somebody to fill out this contract and give up their voice. Maybe she requires the players to enter, or the characters to enter into a contract with her at the beginning of the adventure. And one of the terms of that is a clause for failure, that one of them of her choice forfeits their voice if they fail in this endeavor, and that's how the curse takes effect. Um, And so that has the added bonus of the characters really knowing what the stakes are from the beginning of this adventure and what failure and success really mean. Um, so I like that. I like that the voice is gone, um, and this can be solved with remove curse. It also is nicely that this is a lower level encounter for our characters, meaning that they're not going to have access to remove curse themselves already. Meaning that they got to go hunt this down. They got to go figure out how to remove this curse, and so that creates a little mini side adventure that we may want to create for that. Um, which can be very cool. It will expand what we're doing with this, but there's nothing wrong with that. It adds to the story, I think. Cool. So yeah, let's do that. The couple of other comments here. We have Bill Miller says maybe it could last 4 to 5 long rests as they need to learn how to speak with their own damaged voice. Um, yeah, you can do it that way. Absolutely. There's I personally don't like to put time limits on curses, simply because it can be difficult to track them over the course of many sessions. Well, not necessarily difficult. You'll forget to track them over the course of many sessions in some cases, unless you write yourself little notes or some kind of reminder for that. And the second one is that as soon as your players figure out that curses have a limited time span in your adventures, even if they don't all have a limited time span, but many of them do, or some of them do, they're incentivized to just kind of wait it out, instead of expending their resources. So I like to make curses indefinite until they take some action to solve it. And it doesn't have to be remove curse. You can make it more complicated than that. You can have, they got to find a phoenix feather or whatever to save themselves, or, yada yada yada. But I like making them indefinite personally. I think it adds to the consequences there. And then Ben Older says, "Oh, maybe whoever gives up their voice gets an extra free level granted in Warlock. Maybe the Fathomless Pact, depending on which edition." I mean, that's an interesting idea. I personally try to avoid handing out um, levels as rewards in adventures, because I think that it throws off the balance of the game in a lot of ways. Because now you've got one character who's a level ahead of everybody else, who now has access to everything that the warlock gets at first level, which is a significant amount of stuff. Instead, I would use the like the supernatural blessings that exist to give them a specific ability that relates to this. If you're going to do that, I wouldn't hand it out as part of a failure. I wouldn't give it to them for being cursed. But it's something that I might toss in there for their success. If the siren's happy with them, she may, that might be the tip that she provides, that kind of deal. So that's an interesting idea as well, is giving them some other extra boon in the case of success. And so worth noting down here. Some idea. Extra boon. And then let's see here. Orth says, since the siren could force take a PC's voice, I'd say in doing so makes it so it can be removed, and maybe in doing so the siren takes negative traits for a while or something. Yeah, again, you could do something for that. This comes down, in my mind, what you kind of pick for this sort of thing is the question of, does this happen to the characters because they failed at the quest? Does this happen to the characters because they succeeded at the quest? And if they succeeded, then yes, there should be some things they get out of this, and there should be some negative impacts for the siren. So yes, maybe one of them lose their voices in this case, but they gain some supernatural boon. The siren's voice is insufficient; it has some negatives to it. So their powers are limited, and so we have a case of they succeed, but there's a catch, which is cool storytelling. It can work that way. If it's done for failure, what I don't like to do is say, well, Yes, you failed, but you also got something out of it, and your enemies were hurt by this. I prefer to make that a consequence for the characters that requires them to continue the story in an interesting direction. So, for example, going out to get this curse removed. Now, there's one more thing on their plate, one more hurdle they got to get over, and they have a little quest where one of their characters has got to be really creative potentially. And so it kind of creates a cool little side arc that we might be able to weave back into the story later and expand sort of this universe as we go and expand the campaign in a lot of ways. Um, so that's generally how I try to split these things up with failure and success. You want failure to hurt, you want success to feel good, but that doesn't mean that you can't add uh, a little consequence to success. You can't add a little bright light to failure. Um, you just want to be careful with it, so the characters don't, so the players don't kind of shrug at failure or success because they're going to get something either way. Um, so before we get too far into this, because we've had some great discussions here, some great ideas. I love where you guys are coming at this from. Some very cool thoughts. Let's go ahead and capture the idea of the voice. So if the PCs fail to acquire one of the requested voices and return empty-handed, I'm going to say the initial contract they signed with the siren takes effect, and um, the siren curses a PC of her choice. Um, while cursed in this way, the target can no longer speak or take any actions that require the use of their voice. This includes casting spells with verbal components. We also might say, and the siren curses a PC for choice. We might mention no saving throw. Especially since if we're going with the contract angle on this from the beginning, and the characters got into this willingly, and so we wouldn't do a saving throw for that. If it's something that she kind of just sprung on them, then yeah, we'd toss in a saving throw. Nothing for us is participation trophies. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, again, there's nothing wrong with giving them a light at the end of the tunnel for failure, or giving them, a little jab for success. But you want success to feel good. You want failure to feel bleak. Um, you know, because those ultimately are the only consequences you can really put into the game. Let's see here. Mr. Max, with the voice taken, would there be any type of connection to the siren, potentially a way to gain insight or information the siren may know? Um, um, it's an interesting idea. It's again something that I don't think I would plug in there inherently for failure, because again, it's a boon for failing, right? Like they're getting something good for not completing this quest. Um, and that's again kind of something we want to avoid. But but with that idea, that could be something that they discover later on, right? They go on this quest to end the curse, to get their compatriot's voice back. And at the end, they come up with this, they discover that yes, they can end the curse, get the voice back, but if they keep the curse in place, they now have some access to the siren's power in some capacity. That creates this link between them, that can, or this door between them that opens both ways. So that is a situation where, yeah, you could make that a twist at the end of a different adventure and do something along those lines. So let's, we're not going to, write out this full adventure right here, but let's make a note at this. Getting the voice back. If one of the characters, it's just cleaner if I say PCs. I keep trying to say characters. It's just cleaner with PCs. If one of the PCs loses their voice to the siren, the curse can be lifted by, I'm going to say TK curse quest objective. I'll say, however, at the climax of that quest, they discover that they can end the curse or maintain it and use it to their advantage. And we can clean that up kind of as we go. That is an interesting thing, and it's a cool thing for us to keep in mind for this other adventure, which we'd probably keep relatively light, but having that twist is a cool thing to toss in there. This also begs the question, if the characters can then betray the siren, and they give, for example, they take the widow's voice, and they give it to the siren in the contract. Can they then go on this quest to end the curse on the widow and steal that voice back? And I don't necessarily have an answer for that right now. I would probably let them do that, because why would this quest remove their curse and not the widow's curse or the bard's curse or the priest's curse? And it would really upset the siren. And we've talked about pulling this siren back into the adventure as an NPC that becomes somewhat reoccurring. And so there being consequences to how they treat her that come in later on, again, adds the story, adds layers to it. So that's an interesting idea as well. Mr. Mex says, I made the board. Yeah, you've made the board before, I think. Yeah, so congratulations. Now, these are good ideas, and you guys are putting a lot of thought into these, which I really appreciate. So as we kind of chew through them, we're really kind of, we're taking the steps to kind of fireproof this adventure, and so we can get through some of the loopholes that might otherwise pop up if just one of us was creating it for ourselves. Okay, so we've got failure here. Let's talk about success. Well, since we have come up with this, idea of the contract, it makes sense to me that the siren would have to be held to this contract, and therefore would have to give them the reward that they sought. But it doesn't mean we couldn't have an extra little buff in there, as a reward on the side there to make this an even better sort of success for our characters. So I'm gonna leave that little annotation there for a moment so we don't forget about that boon. And we're gonna say if the I keep doing this to myself. If the PCs succeed in acquiring one or more voices, because there's always the possibility that you have a party that's like, let's just take all three, just to be sure. Unlikely, but they might. So if the party succeeds in acquiring one or more voices, the contract signed by the siren holds her, I should say forces her to uphold their end of the, or her end of the bargain. The bargain. She provides the information the characters, the PCs seek willingly. Additionally, she offers them the, let's say, TK supernatural charm. And then say TK supernatural charm. TBD, and we'll figure out what that is exactly. Yeah. So, yeah, Mr. Mech says, would she know how the party receives the voice, and if they went through the extreme to get it, would she be more appreciative? It's a good question. It would depend on how all-knowing we want the siren to be, and there isn't necessarily a wrong answer to that. You know, if she is all-knowing, it becomes kind of hard. If she knows exactly what the characters went through and what they did, it becomes harder to trick her, which again, not a bad thing. If she doesn't, it's a little easier to trick her. It's a little more possible in terms of resolution. It also, if she knows all that kind of stuff, it makes her a potential oracle that the characters can come back to if they are kind of lost within this adventure and seek advice. Which again is, it makes her a very useful NPC. We could have her do that kind of thing. So maybe she has partial knowledge, and maybe, so you got to think about motivations to this to some degree, right? You know, if she's a predatory creature, why would she give up this extra boon when it wasn't required of her? Well, in my mind, I could see it being a you know a lure for a future trap. Um, you know, or when I don't mean a mechanical trap. I mean kind of a moral trap, or a dilemma that the characters might face later on, where if, you know, she proves herself helpful to them, they might come seeking her help later on. In which case, she can create a new contract with them, and perhaps gain from that as well. And so it's, you know, it's the whole hag mentality, right? Even though she's not necessarily a hag, that where, you know, she's just offering up a little bit of goodness to convince the players that, or to convince the characters that she's not all bad, and that, you know, they might be able to trust her. And really, she's just kind of reeling them in for her own purposes. Um, it's just, you know, kind of an angle that I like on sort of predatory, um, you know, creatures such as this, that aren't, you know, core villains or anything like that. Um, but I like the idea of her having some scrying ability. Um, so let's say stat block TBD, and we'll say some scrying or oracle like powers. So that can narrow down kind of the stat block we want to use and how we might modify that stat block further to kind of fit our needs here. But I like that idea. I really do, Mr. Max, making her a little more, not quite omniscient, but seeing a lot farther afield than the characters might think. Makes her useful later on, makes it more complicated tricker, makes this a more dynamic and useful experience for the rest of the campaign. So good idea, very good idea. Ben Elder says, maybe she provides a coral encrusted key that floats in the seawater and points like a compass to a hidden location that contains the knowledge they seek. Maybe an abandoned coast, fort, or a sunken tomb. Maybe the location could double as a bastion for a player base as well while they are trapped here in this domain. Um, yeah, we could do that. Um, I wouldn't make it the hidden location. Well, let me jump back here. There's only a few circumstances under which I would make it the hidden location of the knowledge they came to the siren trying to get. Um, you know, be if if that key leads them to this hidden location and it's pretty much inconsequential or trivial to get there. It doesn't require a lot more. It doesn't require them to overcome more challenges. Doesn't require them to go through another mini dungeon or things like that. Then yeah, absolutely, that's great. It's cool. It's cool flavor. This coral key shows them to this repository of knowledge, and it makes it easier for us to put kind of any clues we want in there. So that's a cool thing we could do for that. Absolutely. That wouldn't necessarily be an extra boon, but it's a cool way to provide the information that the characters are looking for. What I wouldn't do is make it a whole new adventure because that will frustrate your players. They will get to the end of this encounter. They will go, well, we made this bargain. She's supposed to give us, this. By contract, she's supposed to give us this information, and now we've got to go on this additional quest to get the information that we already quested for, and we already, you know, overcame these other hurdles for. Um, it will frustrate your players, and we don't want them frustrated that way. Um, so I do like though. Um, the idea of a knowledge repository. So she provides the information to the PCs willingly in the form of access to a um, lost repository of knowledge. We'll figure out exactly what that is as we go along. But I like the idea that I think it gives us a tool to, like I said, to be able to put more clues in this, or more diversity of clues in this we might be able to do otherwise. Um, yeah, so let's use it that way. I think. Um, let's see. Mr. Max, she could offer them shelter from Evander on an island, but they're not necessarily safe from the creatures of the island. Um, yeah, I mean that's another kind of boon here. That's you know that's an interesting idea. It depends how often and how regularly they're going to get this atoll, right? Because it's only a boon if the characters can use it throughout the adventure. And so if they are, if this atoll is kind of central to this, to the area of exploration the characters spend here, or if there's an easy way to get back to it, she gives them a dimensional portal that they can jump back to it and be on the island and have the shelter of that. Then it's useful because they can go into the world, they can still use it. Um, it's not useful if they have to trek back every time to get there. If it's always out of their way to access it, then it's becomes kind of a meaningless gesture in terms of what it does for the characters. Now that being said, along that idea, your idea of that she could offer them shelter is at its core a really cool one because we're trying to figure out, what it is that she gives them and being able to shelter them from, the storms and the weather and the danger of things like Ovander is a really powerful boon. It's a really useful thing that would be really, really useful to our characters. So instead of giving them shelter on her island, uh, where which may or may not be accessible. Um, Instead, what if she gives them a supernatural charm that allows them to cast a spell like Leomund's Tiny Hut once per day, right? That effectively gives them this shelter, um, and creates the conditions in which they can rest and reprieve and escape from some of the grueling hardships of this world for a long rest. And so it gives them something very helpful, but it's also not overpowered in terms of this level where they are. Um, and if it's a boon that all of them get, um, then the party can split and they still have access to this. And one group can go over here and they can go over there. If we get separated, one isn't just out of this, out of luck for this sort of thing. So I really like that idea of the shelter. So let's go with that. Let's say the recipient of this charm is able to cast I'm gonna have to look up the spelling on this. Pull D&D up, D&D Beyond up on the side here. Game rules, spells, Tiny Hut. Hey, I was close. Hut. Once per long rest without the material components. Cool. Then again, we could go another route with this. I'm getting down a little bit of rabbit hole. We can make this an item that she gives them, and then there's sort of it's shared between the group, and so they only have access to it, as a group once per day. And so if they do split, one group might be out of luck, one group might have access to it. Something to consider when we kind of sort this out. So just a question of what we want to do with that. But I really like the idea, Mr. Max, of her providing shelter from the storm, as it were. Let's see here. Jonathan Frost says sunken storm giant tomb. Yeah, we're gonna do that. That one's gonna be a full-fledged adventure, right? I think we've got that on the list. Storm Giant's Tomb. C4. 100% we're making that an adventure. That is a really cool idea. Cool enough that it deserves to be its own thing and not a just kind of after action note. Ben Elder says maybe the boon could be that she sings a song in a bottle with her new voice, and once per long rest, they can uncork the bottle and acts like hypnotic pattern, memorizing all hostiles in 60 feet, DC 17, charisma saving throw, perhaps. Yeah. Let's see. Crivens McGee says, I missed one. Adam Clark up above here says, conch shell that returns them to her atoll when it's blown. Yeah, we could do it that way. We could make it a conch shell that they blow in a cast, Leomund's Tiny Hut. We could decide that we want to do the singing in the bottle thing. That's thematic too. And hypnotic pattern is what level of a spell? Because again, we don't want it too OP for second level characters here. Let's see here. Hypnotic pattern. Third level spell, which, yeah, I think Leomund's is as well. Yeah, third level spells. Yeah, that's not OP. We could do either one of that. So there's no wrong answers here. In fact, she could give them both if we wanted to do that. It could be two things that they gain access to. I do like the uh, I do like the ability to get some shelter from the storm, though. I think that that's, especially since we're building this sort of storm elemental evil in here, that's a really useful sort of thing. Um, Hypnotic pattern is more combat uh, useful, in combat, but this hasn't been a high combat sort of adventure, so I like the utility of it. Personally, that's what I would choose, but you couldn't go wrong doing either one. Um, it's just a preference. There's no real mechanical difference there. Let's see here. Uh, Crivens McGee says, "LO, ship in a bottle." Jonathan Frost says, "Instead of Lehman's tiny hut, how about Lehman's tiny ship?" Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Sure. That's that sounds. Let's put that in here. Let's say the hut takes the form of a small um, uh, uh, boat or ship or sailing ship. It is buoyant. Of course, I misspelled buoyant. It is buoyant and waterproof as a bonus action. The caster can direct, can set a heading for movement while conscious. I'm misspelling that. How am I misspelling that? Yes, there we go. Yes, change it, do it. There we go. Yeah, so now we've given them their own little boat here, with the caveat that the caster has to be awake for it to for it to do anything other than follow, a singular heading, a singular course there, which again could put us in a situation where they use this to travel, and it means that the spellcaster doesn't get a long rest because they're having to navigate through the night or something along those lines. Again, as the storytelling makes this a really cool thing, I like, and it adds to sort of to the flavor of this too. The idea of it being a tiny ship, that's cool. Um, Crivens McGee, Liam tiny ship in a bottle. Yeah, you. So the ship in a bottle idea, I have to mention, I think would be a really cool vessel if you had somebody in the group. There's a warlock who's packed the genie, because they get that vessel they can go back into like for 4 hours a day or something like that. And if you made that just flavor wise a ship in a bottle, I think that would be, I think that'd be really fun. That'd be cool. Um, let's see here. Adam Clark says, sounds like we can make a table that gets rolled on to determine what the boon is. Sounds like a lot of great. Yeah, you absolutely could. In fact, you know what? What we could do here is, let's say, random magic boon table as a special mechanic, because that is a really good point. And we could say, just roughly, we're going to say the Viewman's tiny ship is one. We're going to say the hypnotic song in a bottle as another one. Let's say honk of transportation as a third, because we could run with this idea and make it so that there's plenty of magical entities throughout this world who could give these supernatural boons, and we could either draw from that list every time and say this one gives this one gives that, or we can just say, hey, you roll on it and then re-roll any duplicates or something along those lines. As we do this, personally, I would probably map it out so that this one gives this boon, this other one gives this other boon, and then we've got the table just in case we feel like as DMs we need to reward somebody along the way. But keeping a table for that is actually a really good idea, Adam Clark. It's capturing some of that so that we can keep kind of rolling with these magical boons, and kind of add that as a flavor component to this world. Um, let's see here, Liam's Tiny Tiki Bar. Yeah, Mr. Mexley just gets sucked into the shell. Another hermit crab. uh, More jokes about one of our ongoing campaigns. And Jonathan Russ says the siren likely has a collection of odd items washed up on her island, and she can rummage around a pile and pick something. Yeah. Um, she might even let the players pick something. We could have, a couple different options here if we wanted to do that. Definitely something to consider. And this gives her some Little Mermaid vibes here. Look at this stuff. Isn't it neat? Wouldn't you think my collection's complete? She's got all the thingamabobs and what have you on that, and yet she's this predatory creature. So yeah, let's make a choice here. Let's say, or a choice of rewards. We could do that. If we do that, we'll probably make it open up the table to the characters, and hey, there's this, there's that, there's this other thing on there, so that um, so yeah, so that we can reuse some of this stuff, and we don't have to make a detailed list out for each and every time we give out some sort of supernatural object or charm or that kind of thing for this. But yeah, I like that. All kinds of good stuff here. Fantastic, everybody. While we didn't get quite as far as I was hoping to today, we came up with some pretty incredible ideas and stuff that I think is going to really serve us well along the line. This random magic boon table is a really good idea. I think that's something we can let us to help us build out some rewards later on in the future for many more of these other adventures, keeping them really fun. I love the ideas about what they can gain or lose from the siren here. Very thematic, makes her a far more powerful entity. The idea of her being a little more omniscient, being kind of an oracle sort of creature, makes her a very useful NPC later on. So I think we're laying a lot of good tracks for ourselves here. I think we're going to get a lot of use out of this siren, which is good because we spent a fair amount of time building her and her desires out. All right. So with that, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap up the stream here. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you have enjoyed this video or you've enjoyed any of the other episodes, please like, subscribe, leave a comment. All that stuff helps the channel grow, helps keep these chats very dynamic, just like they were today. You guys brought some amazing ideas and jokes to the chat. So love that. And if you want to jump into one of my tables, one of my adventures at some point, please check me out at startplaying.games/GM/RJ Kerr. The openings for my currently posted adventures are up there. That being said, there's also that request custom game button there. That if you are going to, if lost my train of thought here. Yeah, so if you're looking for an adventure that is not one of the ones I posted, like a different module, you want to homebrew, you want a different day, different time, you want to do a one shot as opposed to a campaign, that kind of stuff, click that button. It just lets us kind of negotiate and figure out what you want to do, and we can certainly work with you on that. So thank you again, and I look forward to seeing you all on Wednesday. A couple last comments before we jump aside here. Adam Clark says, as an aside, I'll be running Sky Song Gulch tomorrow as a one-shot. Cool. It'll be modified for 10 players, but I'll let you know how it goes. Wonderful. Yeah, I can't wait to hear about that. Yeah, that would be so cool. Yeah, keep me posted on that one, Adam. Wonderful. Fantasy Animal Vegan says, if you're ready, this definitely sign up and get into an RJ game. He's the bee's knees. Oh, thank you. That's very kind of you. I'll have to give you heroic inspiration at our next session. Fantasy Animal Vegan. Uh, and then anyway, have a great day, everybody. I'll see you on Wednesday, and as always, it's always a pleasure to have you here. I will talk to you soon. Bye now.